Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. John El-Attrache. Dr. El-Attrache is our Global Director of Science and Innovation Direction for Ceva. Dr. El-Attrache's presentation today is titled Inclusion Body Hepatitis, Current Developments. So please welcome Dr. El-Attrache.
Hey, thank you, Gary. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. I know that I had some little technical difficulties this morning. Go figure. Good Wednesday virtual morning to everybody. And I wanted to start off thanking Jose Linares, who actually had put quite a bit of the structure of this presentation together due to quite a few questions he had out in the field in regards to inclusion body hepatitis. And I'd like to walk you through, of course, the aspects of the disease. Number one, how it's looked at into the field all the way to the laboratory, and as well look at what we can do to prevent this disease within the current flocks. See if we can move to the next slide, there it goes. All right, inclusion body hepatitis, of course, as most of you may know or may not know, it's distributed worldwide. It presents itself in various formats. For the most part, within the U.S., our main issue with avian adenovirus is inclusion body hepatitis. It does present itself in different diseases. Avian adenoviruses do with hydropericardium and other parts of the world, with often associated with a different serotype. But adenovirus often infects young chickens and presents itself in many fashions. As we're talking today, inclusion body hepatitis is the clinical aspects we see today with quite a few serotypes. It's typically seen in younger birds, around 2 to 3 weeks, and it's associated with a sudden onset, a sharp increase in mortality, a short course, and then of course when the birds are opened and looked at closely, you'll see anemia and hepatitis. The name of the disease gets itself from specific internuclear inclusion bodies that are noted in the liver cells of the liver, hepatocytes, and it's also observed via histopathology, and has probably been one of the most indicative tests that you can say to, okay, listen, we have inclusion body hepatitis issues with this flock or these birds. So etiology, as I mentioned, this is part of the avian adenovirus. It's a group 1 avian adenoviruses. There's 2 other groups that are associated with this with adenoviruses. Now, it depends who you talk to, whether or not there's 12 serotypes or 13 serotypes, but for the most part, the 12 serotypes are pretty well-founded and well-described via virus neutralization aspects as well as genotyping aspects. And this is one case where the aspects of genotyping correlates very well with serotypes. So genotyping is, for the most part, taken over serotyping by virus neutralization because, as you may or may not know, virus neutralization is very laborious in a laboratory setting. It requires you to have reference strains. It requires you to have antiserum and antigen prepared in order to do the neutralization. So genotyping is a way that has taken over the several years, going from a large landscape looking at the virus to specifically looking at the hexon with the virus. And as you can see by the caricature of adenovirus on the right-hand side, it's a very resistant virus. Has a very strong capsid around it with a hexon, and from these hexons you see the fibers coming off the hexons, which allows the virus to attach to the host and to the cells of entrance. There are multiple serotypes of IBH. Mostly in the U.S., what we find common nowadays are adenovirus 8A, 8B, and 11. Now, it's not to say that serotype 2 or serotype 6 will pop up and cause inclusion body hepatitis. But for the most part, those are, those come in and then die, and they go out really quick. But for the most part, what we find are these particular serotypes associated with inclusion body hepatitis. Now, if you ever have an issue and you find something different, we have some methodologies that we should follow within a laboratory to make sure that these are the etiological agents of the disease that's associated with your flocks or your birds. Of course, the adenovirus can be transmitted through the egg, and for the most part, these outbreaks occur during 1 to 2 weeks, are typically egg transmitted. And of course, once it's transmitted vertically, you can have lateral spread very rapidly as well. And spread can come from bird to bird, of course, but it also needs to take into consideration the feed, water, and the environment for the spread of this particular virus. And then if you have any type of background immunosuppression, then we have basically an issue that amplifies itself. It spreads slowly through a flock, even through these different fomites listed above, or even through the lateral spread. But it's usually the first vertical spread, the egg transmission, that gets everything moving. And you must be aware as well that farm-to-farm transmission occurs. Again, these adenoviruses are environmentally friendly, if you will. They can last for quite a while. So you make sure that you follow all biosafety and disinfection protocols. Historically, outbreaks were associated with IBD and CAV or any type of immunosuppressive issues. That has changed. The terminology paracute has been around for several years. And now, even today, what we're seeing for the most part, inclusion body hepatitis is a disease that is recognized as the primary viral disease, and it's often not associated with immunosuppression, but it can be and should always be looked at whenever inclusion body hepatitis hits your flock. The clinical signs, as mentioned, it's a really sudden marked increase in mortality. Typical mortality is probably between 2 to 10%. It can be greater. Again, if there's immunosuppression involved, it will be greater. And what's kind of surprising about this is that the clinical signs are the window is very small, and then all of a sudden you have dead birds. So, opening it up and seeing, the livers, the pale kidneys, or so forth is something to be observed once these birds have started dropping after minimal clinical signs. So there are a few specific signs, but they're not pathognomonic. They're not associated only with this disease. And, those should be looked at as well and observed. If those are being observed closely beforehand, then maybe if you have previous issues, you can follow this disease progression, if you will. So for the most part, you open up the bird, what you're going to see is a swollen, mottled yellow to tan liver, sometimes some point necrosis, as well as you might see some hemorrhages around the skeletal muscles, either petechia, which are really pinpoint hemorrhages, or you'll see ecchymosis, where you'll see some blotchy, bleeding hemorrhages in the skeletal muscles. Again, the pale skin, the lack of liver functions, you'll see that. The swollen and pale kidneys, we often see this in the laboratory when we inoculate embryos, but you'll also see it in birds that are associated with inclusion body hepatitis. And then other things that are associated with it, the pale bone marrow, thin blood, small bursts in the spleen, and other aspects that you might see. And sometimes you will see, and it shouldn't be mixed up with hydropericardium syndrome associated with serotype 4, but sometimes you will see some pericardial fluid build up in the heart. So basically, if you open up the liver, you see some moderate swelling, yellowish, and then if you look closely, if you look past the reflection of the slide, you do see some pinpoint necrosis associated with the disease. Of course, hepatitis, a severe case, will also be associated with it, the disease as well. And again, the clear mark sign that you have inclusion body hepatitis has always been through histopathology with these intranuclear inclusion bodies. Can be basophilic in nature, or they can be eosinophilic in nature. Either one has been associated with inclusion body hepatitis, but sure enough, as pointed by the white arrow, you see the nucleus just covered up with these inclusion bodies within this particular hepatocyte. As I mentioned, petechia and ecchymosis also appears as well, pinpoint hemorrhages as well as the blotchy hemorrhages as well. And as I mentioned, the swollen pale kidneys are also a sign that, listen, we've got something going on here with some avian adenoviruses causing inclusion body hepatitis. As I mentioned, the field diagnosis, sudden increased mortality, gross lesions and history of prior outbreaks in the area, something to bring into mind. If you're hearing about this happening around you, then the potential of fomite transmission is there. The microscopic lesions are the telltale sign of inclusion body hepatitis. Avian adenoviruses, and this is important to know, especially from group 1, are ubiquitous. I mean, they're everywhere within poultry. And just because you isolate adenovirus or you have positive serology, it by itself is not indicative of inclusion body hepatitis. You have to have further laboratory characterization of this virus in order to make sure, listen, this is what the issue is, and to confirm that, and actually to identify the exact serotype associated with inclusion body hepatitis. And again, you never can forget the background noise in regards to other immunosuppressive agents, or of course the two major ones, infectious bursal disease and chikungunya virus. Now, if we move to the laboratory, and this is where you're going to get your final assessment and say, okay, listen, it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, and this is where you say it must be a duck when you send this to the laboratory. And this is highly needed as you go forward and you look at probably resolving this issue through potential autogenous vaccines. Virus isolation, it's easy to identify adenoviruses in cell culture. It's one of the, if you look at cell culture on a daily basis, or any laboratory does that, they're going to notice adenovirus cytopathic effect, which is your image on the right-hand side with these round refractile cells. It's easy to say, okay, yes, more than likely this is going to be adenovirus. But what's important, and what I would recommend to everybody who's tracking this disease down, I recommend that you do molecular characterization directly from the tissue before you go into virus isolation. That molecular assessment will let you know exactly what's in that liver. And due to the ubiquitous nature of adenoviruses being, everywhere and even within the bird, it's not unusual to isolate multiple serotypes. And a lot of times, some serotypes are more preferential to growth in cell culture than the inclusion body, the one that causes inclusion body hepatitis. So for me, a check sign is to say, okay, listen, I have this in my tissue, and I have this in my isolated virus, so it matches. So, for the most part, we're nailing down the causative agent of this disease, and so we can secure the fact of the matter is that, okay, listen, this is either serotype 8, 8A, 8B, 11, 6 or 7, whatever serotype it might be. That's the one causing my disease, and that's the right pathogen to put into my product, into my autogenous product. Now, does it say, okay, without a doubt, this is the one causing the disease? Well, not necessarily. We utilize tools in the laboratory, virus neutralization. We get variable results to say, okay, whether or not this particular isolate can cross-neutralize or cannot cross-neutralize. But the telltale sign, in which we utilize in some classical virology, and I believe Dr. Marcus will talk about this with reoviruses, the infectivity and pathogenicity analysis. If you're having ongoing problems and existing problems, and it doesn't seem like your vaccine is resolving issues, I suggest that you go into basically an infectivity and pathogenicity analysis in young birds to make sure that this is what you have in your bottle is the one that you're putting into are the ones that are causing the issues in your field. Again, back to molecular, we for the most part, this is increased over the years, our analysis. We used to have a large genomic aspects of typing where we had group genomic subtypes based upon cutting up the DNA of the virus. We had groups A through E, and for the most part, quite a few of the viruses that were causing inclusion body hepatitis were in groups D or E. That has changed since. Most laboratories are utilizing the hexon, which I showed you on the virus. It basically holds up the fibers that attach to the cells. And we've sequenced these hexons, and we're able to differentiate all the genotypes associated with inclusion body hepatitis. And again, this disease and this particular virus, there's very good correlation between genotype and serotype. And then, as I mentioned, the telltale sign that is definitely a positive is the histopathology. So for control of the virus, this probably is common sense, but it must be repeated. Don't use hatching eggs for breeders with a history of IBH in the progeny. This way you prevent the initial hit, and you prevent the the horizontal spread within your complexes. And again, biosecurity and disinfection is very difficult once you get past that phase. Best practices in both biosecurity and good sanitary. Right now, no live vaccine is available. There are, a couple in Australia that are utilized, but I do not know the track record of that live vaccine and its use within Australia. I do believe it's basically a Russian roulette game whenever you apply this particular live vaccine, even if it's safe and attenuated. If you apply it too late, then you might have issues downstream with your progeny. Again, the best way we handle it in the U.S. is autogenous and activated inclusion body hepatitis vaccines. We utilize these in breeders to control and prevent the disease within progeny. And as I mentioned, I think if you're going to take anything home and you're trying to track this disease down and prevent it within your complex or your flocks, then I think it's very important that you understand that you've got the right virus in the bottle. And a lot of times this could be handled by genotyping the adenovirus from the sample directly, and after virus isolation, make sure that those match. And you can have pretty good confidence that you're putting the right product in the bottle. And if time permits, an infectivity or pathogenicity assessment would be very good as well. And finally, don't forget about your background immunosuppressive agents. And that's very important to monitor because it can exacerbate the issue tremendously, and basically, for the most part, help tamper down the disease in the field. And with that is my final slide.
Thank you, Dr. El-Attrache. Just as a reminder for everyone, we will be gathering all questions during the presentations, answering as many as possible during our Q&A session at the end of our time.